Rabies was advancing across Europe. The virus tore through wild mammal populations, moving in a creeping wave of infection that devastated wildlife. To stop it, governments launched a massive counteroffensive. They manufactured millions of vaccine-laden baits and dropped them from aircraft across vast stretches of the continent. The primary target of this airdrop was the main vector of the European epidemic, the red fox. Coordinating an international airdrop requires precise logistical math. Researchers had to determine the exact percentage of the fox population that needed to be vaccinated to break the chain of infection. Calculating this number incorrectly carried immense risk. Overestimate the target, and governments waste millions of euros on surplus bait. Underestimate it, and the virus slips through the gaps, continuing its march. This diagram shows how researchers initially modeled the epidemic. They used classical differential equations, which treat a population as a single, perfectly mixed pool, where every individual has an equal chance of bumping into any other. When applied to the European rabies crisis, these equations produced a daunting requirement. Eradicating the virus meant vaccinating a full 70% of the entire fox population. Based on this calculation, managers adopted a belt vaccination strategy. They deployed a massive, resource-heavy ring of vaccine around an outbreak, rather than dropping it directly on the source. The math was solid, but the underlying assumption was deeply flawed. Differential equations rely on mass averages. They completely ignore physical space and the autonomous decisions of the animals living in it. Foxes do not mix evenly like liquid in a beaker. Adults fiercely defend strict stationary territories. The only major mixing comes from young juveniles migrating across long distances to establish their own space. When a disease is driven by territorial boundaries and specific migration paths, models based on uniform mixing fail to capture the actual mechanics of the spread. To solve this, researchers Florian Jeltsch and Hans Hermann Thulke discarded the top-down equations and built an agent-based model. Instead of calculating a single mathematical average for the whole, their model simulated the individual foxes. They programmed the local behavioral rules for each agent, their exact territorial limits, and specific movement patterns. By simulating actual spatial behavior, the model revealed a highly efficient solution. Eradication did not require a massive 70% belt. Managers could stop the virus with a tight, compact cluster of bait dropped directly over the outbreak. This targeted strategy worked in the field, saving millions of euros. By building the system from the bottom up, the researchers proved that predicting the whole requires mapping the individual. To understand how scientists construct these agent-based models from scratch, we have to look at how physical behavior is actually translated into code. A scientific model is never meant to be a perfect replica of reality. It is a purposeful representation, designed to answer a highly specific question. Consider a basic biological problem: how to optimize a search strategy when the things you are looking for grow in isolated patches. This is the exact challenge a mushroom hunter faces. You only see mushrooms when standing directly over them, and finding one means more are nearby. It is the same challenge faced by a wandering albatross, scanning a massive, featureless ocean for scattered clusters of prey. The strict research question for our model becomes, what movement strategy maximizes the rate of finding clustered items when your detection ability is severely limited? Before a single line of code is written, that specific question acts as a rigid filter. It dictates exactly which parts of reality matter and which parts must be discarded. To build a functional model, we must aggressively strip the complex environment down to its absolute core variables. Attempting to build a hyper-realistic simulation destroys a model's scientific utility. Adding unnecessary variables muddies the data and makes it impossible to isolate cause and effect. Because our question is solely about movement strategy, the filter violently removes the noise. We discard the wind currents, the varied surface topography, shifting daily weather patterns, and thick forests of trees. This diagram retains only three elements: an abstract two-dimensional plane, an agent with a limited sensory radius, and isolated clusters of targets. This extreme abstraction isolates the core behavioral mechanisms so they can be rigorously tested. Now we translate the flight of the albatross into a computational algorithm. The agent's baseline state is efficiency. It uses long, straight movements to cross empty space rapidly. Then we introduce the first conditional logic gate. If a target item enters the agent's limited radius, then it abruptly alters its behavior. It abandons straight flight, executing a tight, localized sweep to find the rest of the cluster. We add a second logic condition to prevent the agent getting stuck. If time elapsed since finding an item exceeds a threshold, the agent breaks the pattern, abandons the exhausted patch, and reverts to its straight, long-distance movement. This strict binary logic looks nothing like the chaotic visual reality of an animal plunging toward the ocean surface. But translating complex behavior into these strict logic gates forms the bedrock of an agent-based model. It turns observation into code, allowing us to rigorously test hypotheses. When you multiply this logic across hundreds of independent agents, a clear, system-wide pattern takes shape. The agents naturally cluster around the target patches, executing a highly optimized foraging strategy. This brings us back to the map of the European rabies epidemic. The simulated foxes did exactly the same thing. Executing local logic gates for defending territory and migrating created oscillating waves of infection. This is emergence, complex, large-scale structures that arise spontaneously from simple, local interactions. The massive traveling waves of rabies were never programmed into the simulation. No top-down equation dictated the shape of the epidemic. The waves emerged organically, driven entirely by individual behavior. Classical statistics fail to predict these patterns. By averaging out the data, they erase the very individuals responsible for the system's behavior. Understanding complex systems requires abandoning broad mathematical averages and adopting object-oriented algorithmic logic. It demands the strict discipline of the purpose filter, forcing us to choose the behavior of bottom-up agents over top-down equations. Modern computational simulation has become a new virtual laboratory, giving researchers a way to experiment on systems that are far too large, slow, or complex to test in the physical world. By aggressively abstracting reality and rigorously defining the rules of the individual, scientists can finally decode the architecture of complex systems.